I'll be talking in this course about Russia under Putin. I'm reminded that back in 1990, when Gorbachev had been in power for 5 years, a social scientist in Russia named Andranik Migranyan, who was very much in favor of maintaining the Soviet Union as an integral entity that would not fall apart, published a very prominent and influential article called The Long Road to the European Home. And by that he meant that the Soviet Union was a totalitarian system, to use his words, and that you can't make a transition to democracy and capitalism directly from totalitarianism without everything falling apart. And indeed, in 1990, everything was starting to fall apart. Gorbachev had tried to democratize the Soviet system, and he made great headway on that score until, however, secessionist movements in the various republics started to get emboldened by the freedoms that they had been given, and the system started to fall apart. So the political process under Gorbachev was one that appeared to have led from initially an urge for democracy, ultimately disintegration of the system, the political system, and the Soviet Union itself. And in addition, because Gorbachev thought that political reform was a prerequisite for economic reform and growing economic prosperity, the economy started to fall apart as well, because there was not an economic reform program going along. It was being postponed until after political reform would break the power of the bureaucracy to prevent economic decentralization. And in foreign affairs, Gorbachev spoke about a common European home stretching from Vancouver to Vladivostok, which is a pretty expansive conception of Europe. But nonetheless, what he was trying to say was we should have an international community that encompasses the Western countries, that encompasses the Soviet Union, and that would be based upon détente rather than on the 70-year-long pursuit of anti-imperialist struggle. So what Migranyan was saying in 1990 was, this can't work. This is going to have a bad outcome. And what you have to have between a totalitarian system and the image or the goal of democracy and capitalism is an intervening period. And he didn't say how long that would last. He didn't say how ugly that would be, but an intervening period of what he called authoritarianism. So you can't make the leap from totalitarianism to capitalist democracy without an intervening period of authoritarianism. Well, under Yeltsin, there was an effort to continue this political democratization and introduction of a market economy, and some progress was made in that direction. But ultimately, what happened under Yeltsin, because of the disorder that resulted from the collapse of the Soviet Union and of the communist system, was a reconcentration of political power, a reconcentration of economic power in the hands of oligarchs and plutocrats, and an effort to gain acceptance by the West as an equal partner in international affairs. What it ultimately resulted in, however, was a plutocratic or an oligarchic economy, a political system that was in disarray, and a foreign policy that was being ridiculed as basically a puppy following the United States lead. And that was the context in which Putin came to power in late 1999, when Yeltsin appointed him for prime minister, and then in March 2000, when he won a full term to the presidency. And even though there was an interregnum when he switched places with the president in 2009 to 2012-13, he was still calling the shots behind the scenes. And so it is fair to say that Putin has been in power now for 21 years, and that his regime has been a reaction to the legacy left by Gorbachev and then Yeltsin. The reaction is political order is more important than political democratization, that economic power has to be fused with political power so that the leadership in Moscow can ensure that the plutocrats, the oligarchs, don't do anything that is not in the national interest, and a search for dignity and acceptance abroad so that Russia would no longer be looked upon as the lapdog of the United States. And the Putin administration went through two distinct periods so far. In the first 10 years of this century, the approach to politics, economics, and foreign relations was somewhat different from what it has been since 2012. And this has been a much tougher system since 2012, a more defiant system with respect to the way the country was being treated by the United States and NATO. And we're going to look at the evolution of Putin's regime, how it came to power, what legacy it inherited, how it sought to reorder that legacy, and then how that new system evolved over time in reaction to trends within Russian society and trends abroad as other great powers interacted with Russia. If you want to get a sense of my teaching style, I'll be giving an Ali talk about Putin's Russia, which is just a 1-hour affair, 15 minutes of questions and 45 minutes of lecture, on February 26th at 10:30 in the morning. And there I'll be talking about myths and realities of today's Russia under Putin. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you.